Curry. Quick public service announcement. There are Bibles and Science and Health in every pew. If you do not have one, please feel free to take them. That's taken care of by the church here, and so we'd like you all to at least have one of those if you'd like one. So take them home with you. As well, in the back, we have some free literature set up on a table back there, so on your way out, feel free to stop by and grab anything you'd like. For now, however, nobody move. Everybody stay where you are and be still, because that alone has more power than you may realize. Our speaker today will be sharing about the healing power of stillness. In an ever-increasing busyness in our lives, the deep-settled calm within ourselves can bring us peace and healing. The busier we get, the less time we tend to have dedicated to quiet time and prayer, which is exactly the wrong answer. Our speaker has traveled all over the world and come face to face with many challenges. In 2010, she visited 10 countries in 5 years. In 2014, she became a lecturer, and most recently, she's become the associate editor of all Christian Science periodicals. Everyone, please welcome Lari.
Hello. Oh, it's lovely to be with you all today. You all ready for some stillness?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. There's a beautiful chalk drawing outside. Did you all see it when you came in?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. So welcome. Glad that you're here, and nice to have some people joining us on YouTube as well on the web. As you heard, my name's Lari. I came from the Boston area today to come down to beautiful Chattanooga to be with you all. And this topic of stillness has been one that has been pretty important in my own life. I have 2 children. I have a new puppy since December, so that has been exciting. We have many chickens, and it's just, a busy household in the Boston area has meant that practicing being still has been key to my own practice of healing. And I'm just going to start off by sharing with you a little sort of listening advice that I was given when I was in graduate school. And I was headed off one weekend. I was going to hear a speaker give a talk. And my professor said to me, Lari, everybody goes and they listen to the speaker give a talk, and they take notes on what the speaker says. And he said, but I want you to take notes on what you hear your own heart saying while you're listening. And that's my advice for you today. That as I share from my own heart, as I share stories from my experience in my heart, I hope you hear your own heart speaking. And that's the real message that you need today, that you came for, more than anything that I say up here. So pay attention to that, to what's coming up in your own heart while you're listening. To set the stage for stillness, I just want to say that the stillness we're talking about today is not about an outer environment, a change in your outer environment. It's not necessarily about coming to Chattanooga or a quiet place or going to the country or sitting by the river. It's really about finding that peace within our own thoughts that quiets all the racing questions, the unsolved problems, the things that we're resisting or trying to figure out in life. It just quiets all of that so that we can be really still in our thinking. It's a mental quality of stillness that we're looking at. And so much so that it's inside, that it doesn't even mean that we have to have an environment that's very quiet or very peaceful. And this story really speaks to that for me. And the story takes place in 1992. So we're going to go back in time a little bit over to Sarajevo. And on this day, a man walks into the center square of Sarajevo. He sits down in a plastic, cheap chair. He's dressed in full, fancy formal concert dress. And he takes out his cello and he starts to play the instrument. And the sounds of the mellow instrument, the beautiful sounds of the cello, sort of fill the square. He's a professional musician. He's the principal cellist of the Sarajevo Opera Orchestra. And as he plays, What's happening around him is that artillery shells are being shot, they're falling on buildings, people are running for cover because it's the start of the Bosnian Civil War. So while all around him there's bombardment and chaos and war happening, this man is sitting in the middle of it playing cello. And he doesn't just do this once, but he comes back for 22 consecutive days to the center of Sarajevo and plays music in the middle of the war zone. He does this to commemorate 22 men, women, and children that were killed in a bread line at the start of the war. This was his answer to the chaos he saw around him in his city. Now, I hope that none of us are in that kind of a situation in our lives, where there's a physical war zone going on around us. But whether it can be church conflict, it could be family conflict, it could be just, well, I don't know how bad the traffic is here, maybe not too bad, but it could be a storm of some sort in our lives. Whatever storms are trying to bombard us on a daily basis, can we bring our sense of stillness into the midst of it, whatever it might be? Maybe the storm is just a fight with ourselves, that we wish we could feel a greater sense of purpose or a greater sense of vitality or joy or love or vibrancy. Maybe there's a feeling of emptiness or purposelessness, whatever it might be that the storm looks like. It doesn't have to look like a lot of activity. It could look like a void of activity. But the stillness is the vibrant connection with God, with divine presence. It's a constant capacity to feel that presence of God. Now, I don't know if that's what this cellist felt when he was sitting in the square. I have no idea. I haven't asked him. It's a real story, by the way. You can Google it if you want, or you can read about it. But when I heard the story, it got me to really think about what it would take to put aside my own safety, my own preoccupations with my life, and to go into the middle of something that seems really chaotic, really difficult, really challenging, and bring that sense of peace to the situation. So that's the question for us today. How do we find that sense of peace? How do we keep it? And how do we bring it to whatever situations we might have to face? So that deep, settled sense of being still, that connects us with that sense of peace, that we can bring it to whatever we have to do on a daily basis. Now, there's a little analogy that comes again from an instrument, from the violin. And it came to me a couple of years ago. I was sitting in my daughter's violin lesson. Many, many days have I spent in my daughter's violin lessons. She's 12 and she's been playing since she was 4. So that's 8 years already that I've sat in violin lessons every week. And so one day I was sitting in the violin lesson, and the first thing that she does when she gets to the lesson, do you know what it is?
Tune?
Yeah, the first thing is that she has to tune her violin. Exactly. Because a squeaky, out-of-tune violin is really an unpleasant thing to listen to. So she stands there in the lesson, and the teacher will play a pure, perfect tone that comes from the tuner. And then my daughter will start to play the same note on her violin, but inevitably it's out of tune. And there's these little fine tuning knobs on the violin. And as you turn them, it brings the violin into line with that pure, perfect tone. It tunes it in to that perfect tone. And this particular day, I closed my eyes once she was tuned, and I listened, and I couldn't distinguish between the perfect tuner tone and my daughter's violin. I couldn't hear the two instruments. I only heard one sound. And that to me is what stillness feels like, that it's oneness, wholeness, that when we get really still and quiet, and we finally silence all those racing thoughts that are clamoring for our attention about one thing or another, that in that stillness is where we feel complete and whole and perfectly in tune with God, perfectly in tune with divine presence. And when we talk about God in Christian Science, so everything you'll hear today comes from my practice of Christian Science throughout my life. And I work now full-time as a healing practitioner of Christian Science. So I work with people who rely on prayer for healing all over the world, actually, through email and text and WhatsApp and anyway, Facebook chat, whatever, phone, whatever it is. So everything you'll hear comes from my practice of Christian Science. And the idea of God in Christian Science is this sense of there being a universal, impartial power of love that we don't have to earn, we don't have to work up to, we don't have to try to be good to earn God's love, to earn the love that we feel from that sense of power. And it's not a separate entity. When we pray to God, we don't pray to something out there somewhere that we hope will come and kind of help us. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. But when we pray to God, what we're doing, I think, in essence, is we're tuning our lives in to God. We're tuning up, just like the violin tunes up. And also, the great thing what I love, another thing about this analogy that I love, is that, are there any violinists actually in the room? Any musicians? No? Sometimes we get some. Okay. Well, if a violinist tunes in the morning, and they have a couple of concerts to play throughout the day, do they just kind of tune in the morning and think, okay, I'm done, now I don't have to tune anymore for the rest of the day? No, exactly. This woman has some musical experience, I think, up here. So a violinist has to tune throughout the day because then when they play the instrument, it inevitably gets a little out of tune. So they're constantly retuning to that perfect tone. And I think that's such a great analogy for unceasing prayer, for practicing stillness. That it's not about going off to a retreat or meditating for a long period of time. Not that that's a bad thing to do, but in those moments where we find that stillness, for me the question is, what happens when we come back into the rest of our lives? How do we bring it back into the rest of our lives? And for some of us, maybe that stillness is just in the morning. I wake up at 4 a.m. every morning. Sometimes I try to sleep later, but it doesn't work. I just wake up at 4. And it's a really beautiful time of stillness and quiet. The puppy's asleep, the kids are asleep, everyone's resting. But the challenge for me is that at 6:30, when everyone's up in the house and everything's moving really fast, to remember that stillness that happened in the morning. And what I've realized is that as we see it as a practice throughout the day, that we tune in throughout the day to that sense of stillness, that it's not just about tuning up once and being done. It's about realizing that as we live our lives, we can sometimes forget about feeling divine presence or praying to God or feeling that sense of divine purpose when we're going to the grocery store or taking care of mundane tasks. But for me, the practice of stillness is about retuning throughout the day. Tuning up to that concept of God's constant love and feeling that as the main work, the main thing we have to do during any given day is to be in tune with that divine love. And what I find is that when I practice getting still to reconnect with that sense of God, I'm much more relaxed when I do things. I'm not so stressed. I don't feel a sense of pressure. And it's come, for me, a lot of times the way to find stillness is sometimes just to remember to look for it. Because one thing is you already have it within you. It's not something you get. It's not something you have to go find, or even that you have to sit down and pray to discover it. It's actually something we already have. And it can just take a moment during our busy days to reconnect with that sense of being still. Now, there are 2 keynote ideas for our talk today. The first one comes from the Bible, which Christian Science is based on, and it's Psalms 46. And this psalm is about turbulence and destruction and the earth shaking. So if you can think about, whatever it is in your lives that seems like the foundations are shaking at times, or they're falling into the sea, or things are kind of troubled. So that's what's going on in this psalm. But then, near the end of the psalm, in case you all didn't read it on your way in, you didn't know it was your homework, so it's okay. No worries. It says near the end of the psalm, "Be still and know that I am God. I'm sure that's familiar to many of you, actually. But what I love about that little phrase, be still and know that I am God. How many things do you hear in that phrase? How many things are there to do? 2 things, right? What's the first one? Okay, so be still is the first step. And then the second one is? Okay, know something, right? So knowing that I am God, knowing there's this presence of God. So there's really just 2 things that we're doing. And this is really key for me for what it means to be still and to find stillness that brings healing power. That it's not enough to just get quiet and empty our mind. That's a good first step. And actually, in schools across America now, there's a lot of teachers and school kids that are having these moments of stillness or quiet or mindfulness during the day, where the kids are supposed to put their cell phones down and put away their paper, and they just sit there and do nothing for like 5-10 minutes. And I actually read an article about this, which prompted me to write this talk 6 years ago or so, 5 years ago. And it was out in, I think it was in Portland, Oregon. And the school, it was a high school that had done this. And they were charting these results, like the dropout rate had lessened, the kids were getting better grades, there was less gang activity. I mean, it was all of these positive results just from having the kids stop in their day for like 15 minutes and sit still and do nothing. So I got really curious about that when I read the article in the Christian Science Monitor, which is published by the Christian Science Church, founded by Mary Baker Eddy, who wrote this book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. And I got curious about that. What is it about sitting still for 15 minutes that's all of a sudden the school thinks is creating all these positive effects? And they didn't answer it, but for me, it's these 2 things. It's that first we're getting really still and we're quieting all of those racing thoughts. We're just being still. And I don't know what each kid did, and I don't know what they were thinking about, but for me, the second step is really important, which is filling up with that sense of divine love, that sense of presence, of something bigger than ourselves, of a self that's bigger than my own personality or my ego or whatever. This bigger sense of self, that's a divine sense of self, the sense of God. And so Mary Baker Eddy's book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, talks about, so Christian Science is based on these 2 books, and the Bible kind of gives the vision, and Science and Health talks about how to live that out in life. And Mary Baker Eddy writes, Spirit God is heard when the senses are silent. So we get the senses quiet so we can hear that voice, that divine sense of direction, like our inner compass that everybody has, but it's so hard to get to sometimes because we have so many thoughts going on in our heads that we have to quiet first. And sometimes it can take a week or longer to just quiet all those thoughts, to really put them aside and not let them race around, just really close the door on them. I think about it in terms of what Jesus talked about when he told us how to pray. He said to go into your closet, right? And then what did he say next? What was the next step? Shut the door, right? Exactly. So you're supposed to shut the door after you go in the closet. And sometimes for me, can be the hardest step, actually, just getting that door shut. It's like a closet overflowing with stuff, and you're trying to slam the door on all the stuff that's overflowing out of the closet. Sometimes thoughts can feel like that, I think. And we're trying to shut the door on all of those racing thoughts. And I don't think there's a formula for how we do that, but I do think that it's key to really quiet the senses and go into that little sanctuary to be able to hear that divine guidance, that divine presence, that voice of God, to know that I am God. All right, so we're going to talk about stillness now in 3 parts. We're going to talk about being still and finding stillness and peace with ourselves, being still and finding peace in relationships with others, and then being still and figuring out how to stay and keep that stillness in light of world events that might try to disturb us a little bit. So that's where we're headed. Can everybody hear in the back, by the way? Is it good back there? Okay, great. Just meant to check that. All right, so the first step, the first part, and I actually need a volunteer, so be ready to come up and write on the whiteboard for me, because we're going to make a list together. And what I want you to do first, because we're a very peaceful group this afternoon, I think. I want to just take like 10 seconds of just for us to just get still, to quiet our thoughts, and just go into that place of being still. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what does it feel like to really be at peace with ourselves. So just 10 seconds of quiet stillness. Okay. We could do that all day and that would be the whole talk. You'd just be quiet, right? So who would like to write on the whiteboard? Can I join a volunteer? Who would like to come up and write? Anybody? All right, come on up. Great. What's your name?
Jean.
Hi, Jean. Nice to meet you. Thank you. So pick a color. And Jean is going to just write down some phrases or thoughts or whatever we're sharing here to kind of capture our list. And what I want to hear from you all is just, how do you know when you're at peace with yourself? What does it look like for you? What characterizes being at peace with yourself? So just shout it out, and I'll repeat it so everybody online can hear too. What does it look like to be at peace with yourself? How do you know?
So calm.
Okay, there's this great sense of calmness, right? So when you're truly at peace, there's a sense of calm that is kind of undisturbable, right? When you're really at peace. I think one of the things for me about being at peace with myself is that I'm not as tempted to judge others when I'm really at peace, or myself so harshly. That judgment, those little snap judgments, they just, I might see something someone's doing, but I'm not tempted to judge when I'm really feeling at peace with myself. All right, what else? What are some other characteristics for being at peace with yourself? Anybody?
Confidence.
Okay, feeling a sense of confidence, right? When we're truly at peace, we're not so worried about what other people think of us. We're not trying to get approval. We're not trying to impress others. We're just feeling confident in ourselves and who we are. And we're just sharing that light. We're not worried about how it gets received. Because that worry about how it gets received can be so debilitating. It's the opposite of being at peace with ourselves. It's like feeling completely unsettled all the time, right? That when we're at peace, we feel good in ourselves and we're not worried about what others think of us. And I don't think that means we're like a bull in a china shop, right? We don't like barge in and just, be really loud. I mean, it's not that we don't worry about our impact on others, but we're not looking for approval from others. We feel that sense of confidence. Okay, great. Couple of more, other things. Yes?
Not fearful.
Okay. Fearless, yes. Is that what you were going to say too? Okay, we have a couple that say fearless, yes. When you're at peace with yourself, you don't feel, there's a sense of fearlessness, right? We're not feeling fears about things. Good. What else? Yes? Okay, a sense of harmony, right? That feeling at peace with ourselves gives us a sense of harmony. Harmony is a wonderful word in music as well. And if you've ever gone to an orchestra concert, the orchestra will warm up at the beginning and everybody's tuning, and it sounds like disharmony everywhere, but they all somehow manage to hear their instrument, get in tune, and then when they start to play, if it's a good orchestra, there's harmony, right? It's amazing. So that out of all that kind of chaos, as you're really listening and tuning in, and you feel that sense of harmony. Good. Feeling at peace feels like harmony. Good. We need a few more things, a few more ideas. What else does it feel like to be at peace with yourselves? Yes.
Balance.
Balanced. Okay, good. Right, that you're not sort of leaning to one extreme or the other. And I think another key element of balance is being really rooted in the present moment. That we're not, when I'm at peace with myself, I'm really not worried about the future. It may still mean I have to do my taxes, but I'm not worried about them, right? And I'm not ruminating or sort of worried about what I did in the past. I'm not going over things and wishing they'd been different or just getting stuck in what happened in past events. I'm really centered in the present moment. So that's a key element of being at peace, is that sense of the present moment. All right, a couple more. Anything else?
No tension.
No tension, right? Okay, so relaxed. You don't feel a sense of tension at all. When you're really at peace with yourself, you're resilient. You're able to kind of go with the flow. And I think related to that is another key one, which is you're willing, to be at peace with ourselves, is to be willing to let things unfold rather than having to control them all the time. And I think that willingness to let things unfold rather than control is key to being, it's a key element that you're really at peace with yourself if you are realizing that you're willing to let it unfold, let it happen. And you don't feel like you have to jump in and control everything. That's a good characteristic of it. All right, 2 more. Anything else? Patience and spontaneity. Excellent. Okay. So yeah, when you're really at peace with yourself, you can be spontaneous. That's a beautiful sense of being at peace with yourself. Because again, you're not sort of worried about what might happen. Sometimes we can get so stuck in our kind of head thoughts that are circling all the time that we're analyzing what will happen, and we can't be spontaneous. We just can't be in the moment because we're so thinking about what might happen, right? But being at peace with ourselves allows us to be spontaneous and to go with that sense of spontaneity. Great. And feeling, what was the other one? Patience. Yeah, did we get patience on there? Good. Peace. We'll add patience, I think. Yeah, there's a wonderful phrase that Mary Baker Eddy wrote that says, the lives of great men and women are miracles of patience and perseverance. And I think those two things together are so brilliant, just patiently persevering, right? Because patience can sometimes feel like just sitting around and waiting all the time, right? But patience is such an active thing that when we patiently persevere, we're active, but with patience. We're not just sitting around waiting, and we're not like, bulldozing our way through life. We're just patiently persevering. I love that. So I think that is part of being at peace, that we persevere, but we're patient with it. And that we're patient, but we're also active. So that's a beautiful sense of being at peace. All right, Jeannie. Okay, let's give her a hand. Say thank you so much. Excellent, thank you. So we're going to keep this list up here. I don't know if you can all see it in the back, but the reason that we create this list, and I'm just going to share a story now, is because so often in the healing aspect of stillness, what we're looking for is to get a vision for what we want to see. And what we want to see in healing are qualities like balance and harmony and peace and calmness. That's really what we're gaining through healing. And what's tempting is to think that we're solving a problem. So for example, the problem that I was facing about 10 years ago was a chronic reoccurrence of a stiff neck. So I would wake up in the morning, I would have a really stiff neck, I wouldn't be able to turn my head very well, and it would sort of progressively get worse. And then it would kind of go away, off and on, but it would come back. And I grew up in a household where my mother was a Christian Scientist and brought us to the Sunday school in the Christian Science church. So I learned at a very young age to pray for healing of any sort. So that's what I had been doing. And I would sometimes get some temporary relief, but I hadn't really found a permanent solution to this issue. It just kept reoccurring. And people kept saying, well, maybe you need to change your bed or your pillow, or maybe whatever, you're just getting old, or whatever. There are all these reasons people had for sort of why this might happen. But I wasn't actually looking for a reason. I really didn't want the reasons. What I wanted was to find relief from it and understand more about the nature of my identity spiritually and how that relates to this concept of God, divine power. And so that's what I wanted, but I hadn't really been getting in deep enough. And so finally, as sometimes happens with these things, it was around Christmas time, and I had a lot of pressure that felt like it was sitting on my shoulders, literally. I had a huge workload of patients I was working with, and my kids were home, I had family coming into town, I had a meal I had to make, and I really, at this time in my life, I still have high standards, but my standards were sort of impossibly high, and everything just had to be perfect all the time. That's kind of how I felt. And of course, if it was going to be perfect, then I had to do it. So everything was on it was all up to me. And so I was feeling a lot of burden. And I woke up 3 days before Christmas with a really stiff neck. And my first thought, and I woke up to pray in the morning, but my first thought was, oh no, God, I don't have any time for this kind of a problem. We need to have a healing really quickly because I have so many things on my to-do list. I have to get on with everything I have to do. So I need a real quick healing of all of this pain that I'm feeling right now. Now, can you hear who's kind of at the center of that prayer? Right? And so it's sort of as if, so I like to say that, this came to me one day to talk, I like to sort of say, it's as if I was thinking that I'm the CEO of my life, and God is like this divine interventionist, right? Or like divine assistant, right, to the CEO. And kind of comes in when we have a problem and helps us fix it, and then we move on with our day. So that's kind of how I was thinking a little bit, right? But I don't recommend that you pray that way at all, because it didn't have any results. I really was just focused on, I want to fix this problem and kind of move on with life. And what happened was, at the end of the day, I felt a little worse, and the next day I felt even worse, and by the third day, I had never had so much pain in my back and my spine and my shoulders and my neck. To the point where even just like taking a step forward would send these shooting pains up my back and my spine into my neck, and it was so painful, I had to just literally prop myself and kind of sit still. So I was forced to be still. And this was key because I think unless I had been forced, I wasn't going to stop. I had so many things on my to-do list, I just was going to keep going through the pain or whatever. But at this point, it was to the point I couldn't move. So as I'm sitting in bed and started to pray about this, and for the initial part of it, it was really that shutting of the door. I could not get over thinking about all the things I wanted to be getting done, and how the presents wouldn't get wrapped the way I wanted, and the meal wouldn't get made the way I wanted, and the table wouldn't be set. All of these things that I wanted to have happen for the Christmas, our holidays, that weren't going to be done because I couldn't do them. So I had to put those thoughts aside, and it was hard, but I did. I quieted them, and as I could feel my whole self just letting go, because I couldn't do it, I heard this little kind of message that came to me. And the message said, I am the shepherd. Now, this is one of those moments where, I wasn't thinking about shepherds, and it just came to me, right? So, this is where we be still, and then we know that I am God. This is that, as we're getting still and quiet, we hear that voice. And it can sound like a lot of things, but this day it sounded like a shepherd voice. And I started to think about what that meant. And I realized that I had been feeling like the shepherd. I had been shepherding my kids and my household and the meal and the projects and everything I had going on and my work, etc. And I hadn't been thinking of being shepherded at all. Because I realized if I thought about being shepherded, what did that make me in this analogy? Right? A sheep. And I realized as I was sitting in bed that I actually disliked the idea of being a sheep. That I had a bias against being a sheep that came from a teacher that I had in school years ago who literally told us, don't ever be a sheep. I think I was a second grader, right? What did she mean? What was she talking about?
Blindly follow.
Don't blindly follow, exactly, right? And that's good advice. Like, you don't want to blindly follow your friends when they're doing something stupid. That's what she was trying to teach us, which was good advice. But I think what happened is as I grew up, I just kept thinking it's much better to be a leader than a follower. And we sort of devalue those following qualities. Well, I got a little curious, and I started to think about what it would look like to be a sheep in this metaphor, right? That if God is the shepherd, there's a divine power and an influence that feels like our inner compass, that sort of divine sense of God that gives us direction. And if that shepherds us, and we're meant to be sheep in relationship to that, what are the qualities of sheep? So what are they? What are some qualities of sheep with God as this divine shepherd? What would you say? Trust. Obedience, yep. What else? What? Listening, right? Exactly. If you take this analogy into real life, that sheep actually know the voice of their shepherd distinctly. They can distinguish their shepherd's voice from all the other shepherds or from all the other noises. So they listen and they know they're tuned in a way. The sheep are tuned into that voice of their shepherd. And I think that's really key, that sense of knowing the shepherd's voice, maybe, better than they know anything else, any other noises. I thought about the quality of humility and gentleness and gratitude, trust, obedience. And I also realized, someone told me afterwards, not too long ago actually, that sheep will only drink by still waters. At still waters, did you know this? That if the water is moving, they won't trust it, they won't drink. So they're trusting the shepherd to find them the stillness that nourishes them, that refreshes them. So I was sitting in bed this day and I kept thinking about all of these qualities of being a sheep. And it was a struggle because I was resisting it because I wanted to feel in charge. I wanted to feel in control. I wanted to feel like I was the CEO, like I was the manager, like I was the one doing all this stuff. But what this was teaching me over this number of hours that I was pondering of this sense of responsibility, letting go of this sense of burden, of this sense that it was all up to me. And if I didn't get it right, then, well, it was just going to fall apart. And this was a huge, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, ship turning in the night. Like, this was just a big mind shift for me. And what it meant was that my prayer, when I woke up in the morning, was no longer like, okay, God, here's what I got going on today. Let's have some good spiritual ideas that I can apply to my day. Let's move on, right? It was a little like that. My prayer shifted to being more of a, well, good morning, God. What do you have in store for today? A listening prayer to listening to the unfoldment rather than dictating what's going to happen and applying spiritual ideas to what's happening. You see the difference there? That sense of listening for the unfoldment meant that I may not know how it's going to go, but it's going to be okay. So we just got this new puppy I mentioned, but a couple of years ago, it took me a couple of years to get a new puppy. We had a black lab for many years that passed away, I don't know, 4 years ago or so. And this lab was about 95 pounds, huge dog. And one day, my family was all away, and I had my little Prius out, and I was getting ready to go to the beach. And the dog was roaming around in the yard, and the only door open was the driver's door, the driver's side door. And this is a huge black lab dog, big dog, older dog. And she could tell I was getting packed and ready to go somewhere, and she didn't know where. But she climbed into the driver's side and was wedged herself under the steering wheel on top of the pedals, the brake pedal and the accelerator, and kind of half on the seat, and then she was just stuck there, right? This huge dog was stuck in my little Prius, right? Because she knew I was going somewhere, and she knew it was going to be good, and she wasn't going to miss out. And I had to pry her out of there and put her in the back to take her with me. But the point is that this kind of attitude was what I was learning by being a sheep, that we may not know where we're going all the time. We may not know what's going to unfold. We may not be able to exactly see the form or the events of the future, but we know it's going to be good. That's what my dog taught me that day. And that to me is what the sheep thoughts are like. That rather than saying, this is what I have going on, let me find some spiritual ideas for it, it says, I don't know what's happening, but I know it's going to be good, and I trust, and I'm going to follow the shepherd voice. Anyway, this is where my thought was shifting, and this was a big shift to let go of control for me. And what happened is that as I let go of all of that sense of need for control, the pain went away as well. The pain kind of fell away as well. And by the end of the day, I was feeling much better. I went downstairs, I rejoined my family, but instead of kind of jumping into things and being like, okay, here's what we're going to do, I just kind of went downstairs with this sense of just kind of folding myself into the harmony that was going on rather than being in charge all the time. And that has stayed with me. And I've never had all those reoccurring stiff neck issues that I had, they never came back. They stopped after that and it was done. Because I let go of the perfectionism that was kind of belittling me all the time. And I just could feel that it was more important to be receptive to that shepherd voice than it was to feel in charge. And the other key element of this in terms of healing is that we can sometimes get tripped up when we're getting still and we're trying to resolve a problem in our life. We can sometimes get focused on thinking we're problem solving with prayer. That here's our problem and I'm going to apply a bunch of prayers to it and I hope I get a solution. God help me please kind of thing, right? But that's actually not the prayer that Christian Science teaches. The prayer that we learn according to Christian Science starts with this idea of there being a perfect tone, a perfect God, and that as we tune ourselves into that, we see our own perfection as well. the perfection of ourselves spiritually. And it's part of identifying the vision of what we want to see in terms of the qualities, as opposed to problem solving an issue. So what happened was I wasn't even thinking about my stiff neck. I wasn't praying about ligaments or nerves or pinched nerves or pressure or stress or whatever. I was thinking about that relationship of my own identity with God. And that's what changes our bodies. That's when our thought and our consciousness completely transforms, it also transforms our bodies. That's what the healing is all about. It's not actually about changing the body. It's about having our experience in the body come into line with what really is, that sense of spirituality that already exists. That the stillness is already there, the healing's already there. We're discovering it. We're discovering what's already true, as opposed to creating something new. So getting still and being still for ourselves gives us that sense of connecting with what's already true, connecting with a reality, a spiritual reality that's already there. And Mary Baker Eddy wrote this. I think this is a helpful idea. She said, "To the burdened and weary, Jesus saith, Come unto me. There remaineth a rest for the righteous, a rest in Christ, a peace in love. The thought of it stills complaint. The heaving surf of life's troubled sea foams itself away, and underneath is a deep settled calm." That when the heaving surf of life's troubles foam away, we discover this deep settled calm that's already there. That's how the stillness can relate to healing. All right, so let's look now at how do we find stillness for ourselves and bring it to our relationships with others. And the idea that's helped me with this is the sense of something that Paul said in the Bible. So Paul said over and over in his letters to the Corinthians and the Thessalonians and the Galatians, etc., when he traveled around and taught, he said, "You all have the mind of Christ." Maybe he said it like that, I don't know. He also said, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ," right? So he was talking about how each one of us is not Jesus, right, but has the qualities that Jesus had, the spirit that was in Jesus, that's a timeless spirit. And it's a power that exists today for each one of us. And it's part of our nature. And that as we discover the Christ nature in ourselves, we can also discover it in others. And when we feel it, what it feels like to me is, well, I'll tell you a story of what it feels like. So I was sort of entrenched in a conflict with one of my little sisters for a while. I have two younger sisters. And we were both adults, but I was a new mom, and she did not have any children. But she took it upon herself every time she came to my house, and it was, very frequently, that when she came over, she would notice me doing something with my son, and she would start to tell me how I should do it differently. So she was giving me all this parenting advice. But remember I said she wasn't a parent, right? So it became kind of a conflict for us. Because I was tempted to start to be defensive about how she was commenting on my parenting and to feel like it was worth defending. But I'd read lots of books. I was trying to be a good mom. And who is she to tell me how I should do my parenting? What does she know, right? So this kind of became a pattern for us. And it wasn't very comfortable. And I could feel myself sort of arming up. Like when she would come over, I would kind of arm myself up mentally to kind of defend, like, okay, what can I say this time to convince her I'm a good enough parent, right? So I could feel myself kind of getting in that mode of defensiveness and sort of armoring up. And I didn't like that. It didn't feel good. It wasn't, this was years ago, but it just didn't feel like the relationship I wanted with my sister. And this was the idea that I was thinking about, was the sense of the Christ spirit in me responds to the Christ in others. And I was thinking about it in many contexts because I was doing work at the time where I was something called the Committee on Publication for the State of Vermont. It was a Christian Science church position, and I was charged with talking with people in medical nursing boards, in the legislature, in the Senate, in the media, all about Christian Science and about healing and about Jesus and the Bible, et cetera, et cetera. And what I often would think about before I would go to these meetings was how there was this spirit of goodness in me that was also in these reporters or also in the government officials, and that's what we could hear with each other. Because it would be tempting to think I had to find the right words to explain what I was talking about, and that's a lot of pressure. So I had been really thinking about this in my work context, and I thought, well, let me apply it to my sister. And I didn't know what I would say, I didn't know how it would make a difference, but what I wanted to see was that there was that Christ impulse that was guiding my thoughts rather than my own reaction. Because that's what happens in conflicts with other people, right? We react. That's how it can feel. So my sister comes over, and what I realized was that there are many instances, as you read the Bible, you can look for these, that there are many instances where prophets or Jesus or other people in the Bible pause before they run in and do something. So before Jesus healed the blind man in Jericho, Bartimaeus, he stood still, it says. And then he went and healed him. And this happens numerous times, and there's sort of this pause before something transformational happens. So that gave me like a light bulb went off, right? I thought, okay, I just need to pause, and maybe I'll hear an idea from the Christ, and I didn't know how it would work exactly, right? But I just thought, I'll just kind of pause before I react to her. So she came over, and that was my goal, was to not react, and to pause and listen for what I should say. So that's what I did, and I paused, and this idea came to me, because she was giving me parenting advice again, and I was tempted to react, but instead of thinking of what I wanted to say, right, I just paused. I didn't think of what I should say to defend myself, and I just heard this idea come to me, and I shared the idea with her. I have no idea what the idea was. I'm so sorry. But it was something really funny. And so she started laughing. And I knew this was the Christ, because my sister and I did not have a sense of humor at this time in our lives. So it had to have come from some other place than me. And we ended up really laughing together and having a great time. And I thought, well, this is much better than the tension and the arguments we'd been having about parenting. And I realized that was the relationship I wanted. Again, what's the vision that we're going for? We're not just about solving problems. Stillness is not just a void of conflict or a void of noise or an emptiness. That true peace is not just an absence of war, an absence of conflict. True peace is the presence of something. True stillness is the presence of quietude, of vibrant connection with God. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking to just empty things out. We're looking to fill them up with that clear sense of peace and of God. So we need that vision. What's the vision like? And I realized that was my vision. I wanted to be laughing with my sister rather than fighting with her all the time. And we never, we didn't have more arguments about it. But you know what is interesting? She never changed. She still doesn't have kids. She still gives me parenting advice 19 years later, literally. I took my son to college a month ago. And then I went, and she had lots of advice about how that should happen. Anyway, sometimes her advice is great, actually. She sometimes has very, very good advice. And so I take it, but what's changed is that I stopped reacting to it. She didn't change. She didn't change her behavior, what she was thinking. Nothing changed on her end, but I lost all desire to react to it. And that's what the mind of Christ does. It allows us to not live in a reaction to others. The mind of Christ says we get the information about life directly from God, not from other people's behavior. And that was key for me, that it's not about trying to change someone else and how they behave or what they do or what they say or how they take the garbage out or act in the bathroom or whatever. It's not about trying to change someone else's behavior. It's about getting our information about that behavior directly from our prayers, from the stillness. And maybe there's still something to correct, but we can do it with that spirit of Christ that really enables there to be a correction rather than nagging or criticizing or whatever it might be. And then we also don't live in constant reaction to others. The mind of Christ allows us to get information directly from that oneness with God, as opposed to what we see in front of us. And Mary Baker Eddy said, I'll just share one other idea, then we'll talk about the world briefly. She said that She was asked once, how do you heal something? And this was her answer. She said, I saw the love of God encircling the universe and man, filling all space. And that divine love so permeated my own consciousness that I loved with Christ-like compassion everything I saw. This realization of divine love called into expression the beauty of holiness, the perfection of being, which healed and regenerated and saved all who turned to me for help. That it's that sense of filling up with divine love that is the mind of Christ, that allows us to be a healing presence in the lives of ourselves and others, and allows us to see healing. Okay, so now the third part of this is we'll talk about what does it look like to be still and not react to world events. And this is really key in Christian Science. And we didn't talk about those two words, Christian and science, but the Christianity part is pretty clear. It's a Christian religion, right? The science part of Christian Science is what stillness is to me in a way. It's about practicing that vision of Christianity. Because the authority for a science doesn't come just from faith, right? If you go to, my kids have taken biology, chemistry, physics, so chemistry class. If you have to do a chemistry experiment and you learn about the elements in chemistry, and then you're supposed to go home and test them out, and then you do your lab, and you write up your lab, and you take it into your teacher. If you decide, well, I have absolute faith in the teacher that what she said is correct, so I'm not going to bother with the lab. What will happen when you go back to school? You will get an F, someone said. Yeah, exactly. You will fail because a science doesn't rely on only having faith in something. And it's the same with the science of Christianity. That faith is a key element, but it's not enough. That you have to do the lab of life. You have to take those ideas and see how they're lived, and that's where the authority comes. Not from hearing what I say, not from what someone else talks about, not from a preacher or someone else or someone who can give you advice, but from taking the ideas directly in the Bible and putting them into practice in life and seeing how they have authority. That's what the Science and Health book teaches, and that's what the science part is about. So one of the things that Mary Baker Eddy did when she founded her church was she looked around and she saw in society at the time, and this was in the early 1900s in Boston, that there was a lot of fake news being propagated. Does that sound familiar today? Right? It hasn't changed, right? So there's all this kind of fake news on different sides of the political spectrum, and she wanted to create a news source that was focused on truth, kind of the higher sense of truth, that was focused on blessing humanity, that was focused on digging deeper into whatever's going on the surface, going underneath the surface and finding the story that brings healing to the world, that honestly can bring healing, that brings people together, that unifies rather than divides. So she created the Christian Science Monitor newspaper, which today is an online news source and a weekly magazine. But that's how much she cared about the world. So anyway, so this has been close to my heart in my practice, is praying for the world. And yet, sometimes, on any given day, I can hear a news report, and it doesn't matter if it's a gas explosion, a chemical weapon explosion in Syria, or if it's something that happened in Afghanistan, or a bombing, or a shooting in school, or something that happens in the US government, or there was just a shooting recently in the Netherlands, there was the massacre in New Zealand. Any given day, I could turn the news on in the morning and be depressed after half an hour. So I have really had to look at this and figure out how do we pray effectively about what's going on in the world. And I'm still working on it, but I'll share with you some ideas. The first idea comes from a story that I heard. And it was a contest, actually, that was held for children. And they were asked to draw what they thought peace looked like. And this was when I was working in peace building years ago. And so all these kids sent in all their pictures, and the winning picture was this. The child had drawn this huge, rushing, roaring waterfall that was spilling down. And is a waterfall a really quiet place? No, right? So there's lots of noise and you have to shout to be heard, kind of. And right behind the waterfall, on a little rock ledge, sat a yellow canary, tiny little bird. And the child had drawn the canary as singing. And that was the picture they chose to represent peace. What I love about it is that it's like the cellist in the middle of the war zone, right? There's the waterfall that's all turbulent, but the canary doesn't care. Can anyone probably even hear the canary? I don't know, right? But the waterfall? Maybe not. But the canary's still singing. It's not worried about the noise and the turbulence. It's also right next to it. It's right on a rock. It's rooted on this rock ledge, right near the waterfall. It's not flying away, ignoring it. It's right there, but it hasn't lost its voice to contribute. And I think that that's, for me, one of the important pieces and elements of praying for the world is that when I find myself jumping into the pool with the water spilling over me of the news, it's difficult to not feel sucked underneath. It's really challenging to not get sucked into the drama of it. And just a couple weeks ago, I did this. We got an Alexa for Christmas last year. So anyway, I've experimented with this Alexa. And you can say, Alexa, turn on the news, and she'll just play some news. And so I did that. I had never done this before. And literally within 10 minutes, I had to turn it off because it was a killing in Boston. There was some murder. It was just all this depressing stuff. And it's not that I didn't want to hear it, but I needed to turn it off so I could now process all of the negative stuff that I just heard. And what I found was that the minute I started feeling like I was being sort of pulled under by the water, it was time to kind of get back to that canary voice. Like, what was God telling me about all these events? And sometimes that can feel like an intellectual exercise. But I heard a story years ago from a woman who was talking about living in Germany during the time when the Berlin Wall was up. And I was 20 years old at the time when I heard this talk from her, and I'll never forget what she said. She had talked about praying for 10 years straight, every single morning, for the wall to come down. And this was half my lifetime when I heard it. And I thought, I was just incredulous. I was thinking, that's half my lifetime this woman's been praying about one thing that she didn't see results about for 10 years. How do you do that? And so I went up afterwards and asked her, and I said, how did you keep going? How did you not give up after, 9 years or something? Like, what made you keep going all that time in prayer? And she said to me, the wall came down in a moment, but it wasn't the work of a moment. It was the work of all of the moments leading up to it that changed thought. That it took thought to change first, before anything could happen with the wall. And then she said, Lari, how do you think we change thought? She said that every time she prayed, she would get a sense of peace that assured her that mental blocks were shifting. She could feel the mental shift going on. And when she felt that, she knew she was on the right track, and she just persisted with it, that patience and perseverance over many years. And then the wall came down, but it was the thought shift that happened first. And that, to me, is the reason we pray for the world. We don't pray for the world and then look at what's happening in the world. And we don't pray, for example, for the end of school shootings here in America, and then see a school shooting and think, oh, well, I guess my prayer didn't work, right? That the prayer is not about changing something like that immediately. The prayer is about shifting thought, about changing the consciousness that's inciting the violence in the first place. Recently, and after the New Zealand massacre occurred, I was listening to the president, I guess, of New Zealand talk, and she said that this man who had done the shooting had broadcast it, right, live on Facebook or something, because it was about notoriety. And she said that she's going to name the names of the people she wanted to talk about that had been killed, because those were the names that mattered, not the name of the man that had done this. And she said, I won't dignify his act by naming him. And what I loved about that was her conviction in changing the conversation. That she intentionally wanted to create the conversation around the people that needed to be remembered. And not notoriety, not give a sense of being notorious or whatever, or being famous to the man who had done it. That kind of intentionality to me is what a prayer does, is that it focuses our thought on being part of the solution. And it changes thought. And every time we get still and quiet, we're shifting those bricks in thought that need to come down first before anything can happen in the world. And I'll just end with one thought from Mary Grady about this, and then we'll just have 5 minutes of questions or so, or comments. Mary McGrady wrote, the best spiritual type of Christly method for uplifting human thought and imparting divine truth is stationary power, stillness, and strength. And when this spiritual ideal is made our own, it becomes the model for human action. To me, that's the science at work, that the stationary power and stillness is the strength. That when we feel that, we're helping to create the model for human action, the change we want to see in the world. So getting still and finding our own peace in our thought always shifts something out in consciousness. It always has a result. It's always worth it. All right, so I just thought we'd take a couple of minutes. We've got like 3 minutes or so, but just any comments, any questions, anything you were thinking, anything you want to respond to, anything you want to ask about. So just a couple of minutes for you all to ask questions or make comments or add anything you'd like to add that I didn't say, that I forgot. I'm sure there's things I forgot. It always goes by too quickly. Anything at all? Yes.
Years ago, I walked into the supervisor's office, and he had a framed quote up on the wall, and the picture showed a gentleman who was out in the farmland plowing and turning the soil and all of that, and at the bottom it said, pray for a good harvest, but keep on plowing. And,
That's great.
and I think that's so much of what you're saying is that, yes, we do pray for a harvest, but we must keep on doing the other things to enable us to achieve it.
Oh, thank you. I love that. Isn't that the patience and perseverance? That we don't just sit around waiting for God to do something in our lives and hoping God will intervene, right? That it's about persevering. It's in the work that we see that patience expressed. It's in the plowing that our prayer is in action. I remember I went to Jerusalem, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and we went to the Wailing Wall that's there. And we had this wonderful guide who was a Jewish man, but knew a lot about Christianity, and he was a great guide. And we got there, I was interested in the whole Wailing Wall, and there were all these people writing little prayers, folding them up and sticking them in the wall. And I just was curious about it, and I said, well, what are they expecting from this action that they're taking of putting the prayers in the wall? And the guy was funny. He looked at me. He said, well, Lari, it's not like it's a God mailbox or something. I said, okay, well, he said, you have to go live your prayer. You put your prayer in there, but then you have to go live it. And I said, yep, I agree. I agree with that. So I think that's part of it, that it's the living and the working that allows us to see God in action. And I think that for me in my life, whenever I have felt like patience is about getting still and kind of being stagnant, I never get the answer that I'm looking for. It always comes when I start to take a step forward And I don't know if I'm going in the right direction. I could be going in the wrong one, but I keep listening. And then if I'm in the wrong way, then I get turned into the right direction every time. But it's when we're moving and working that we feel that direction more than when we're just standing still waiting for it. I think that's really true. Thank you for that. Good. Anything else? Comments or questions anyone would like to make? Yes.
I'd like to talk about reacting. I have a supervisor that's younger than me, and she's always reacting. So now I'm going to pause.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. She was saying she has a supervisor that's she's always reacting to it, so she's going to practice that pause. And I think that's great. And email me later and tell me how it goes. I'd love to hear about it. Because I just find one of the things that I've been doing lately is we just changed my schedule a little bit. And so it's starting earlier in the morning, which means my daughter has to up earlier and get to school earlier, which for her is not ideal. And so there tends to be a little feeling of rush and hurriedness in the morning. So when I sit down in the car to start the car, it's easy to just think, oh, we gotta go. But I've been sitting in the car just like literally stopping for a minute before I stick the key in the ignition. And just kind of taking a breath and just being still. And that's what comes to me, just be still. And then I drive the car and I just drive in a more relaxed way, I think. And then we have a better conversation, my daughter and I, and we're not sort of taking the rush from the kitchen into the car. And I think there's something to that. I don't know what the effects have been yet, but I know our conversations are better. And so I do think that pause that allows us to just not react, to not armor up and defend ourselves all the time, but to respond to what God is telling us, those inspirations. And maybe they'll be really good humored and you'll say something funny and your supervisor will laugh. You never know. So great. Thank you so much. Anything else? We're getting near the end of our time. Well, I'll just thank you so much for being a great audience tonight, and I'll stay up here if you have individual questions or comments. You can certainly come up and find me afterwards. So I know there's a final announcement, but thank you so much for coming. Thanks.
And on behalf of the Christian Science Church of Chattanooga, I just wanted to thank you all for coming today. Again, help yourselves to the Bible and Science Health, as well as the table and back. Thank you again.